I'm Jim Kircher. We've done a lot of stories, including one that's coming up, on the latest inventions that are changing our lives. Driverless cars, 3D printing, robots, virtual reality. After all, the show's called SciTech Now. But we're going to start out with something that's really more SciTech then. Then being a time when machines weren't filled with printed circuits, but filled with moving parts. Kara Vaninger went to a place that draws photographers and painters. But if you look close enough, it is also a place with lessons in geology, energy, technology, and even community.
A lot of people come out here and they'll say, well, why is this mill way out here in the middle of nowhere? But nowhere was somewhere 100 years ago. 200 folks lived out here.
Out here is Alley Spring. Located in Shannon County, Missouri, it was the ideal location to build a grain mill, sparking the short-lived boom of a vibrant community.
But a lot of visitors, they'll come to this region and they'll see on a map the Ozark Mountains, but these mountains are a little bit different. Most mountain chains, like the Rockies and the Appalachians, they were built up with two plates colliding and lifting those mountains up. Most of these springs and these rivers actually set at the top of those mountains. They've eroded and formed out what we call hollers, which are the valleys, kind of like what the Grand Canyon would. All these springs you drop into, and you take that in combination with our native bedstone, which is dolomite, derivative of limestone. It's highly soluble. So when this water that's slightly acidic hits that dolomite, it's kind of like an Alka-Seltzer tablet. It dissolves it. And this water is able to penetrate through that dolomite, and at a lower elevation, it's able to surface and form a spring. The mill itself was built in 1894 by George Washington McCaskill. It was the hub of the community in this small hamlet. Most people back then were subsistence farmers growing grains like wheat and corn. And as they grew more and more and more, they needed to add a mill to process that grain. Folks would come in from miles away, 30 or 40 miles away, with a wagon load of grain that they've spent their very essence of life trying to produce, plowing up the fields alongside the rivers. Since so many folks were coming out all at once to drop their grain off, it wasn't practical to run home and run back in a wagon. So they'd stay around in the community and they'd mill around, and that's where that old saying, milling around, comes from. So this technology inside the mill was state-of-the-art in 1894. Most people are used to the mills that have the large water wheel and the stones for grinding. This one actually uses new steel rollers and a water turbine like you find on dams today to provide the power for the mill. And actually, Alley had electricity because of that water turbine very early. You can still see some porcelain insulators hanging in the ceiling. And this place, out in the middle of nowhere, had electricity way before somewhere did. This is the same technology, even design is identical to some of the turbines being used in dams throughout the world for hydroelectricity. This one didn't generate electricity for the mill to run it, but it was pure mechanical power. Very efficient, generated about 50 horsepower. With a water turbine, it actually sits out underneath our deck. And what we have is a dam. We have two locks out there. We'll lower one gate. That starts backing up the water level in our turbine pit. That water level will get to about 6 feet overall. Then they'll open up the vanes on the water turbines, and the water will actually penetrate into that housing and it'll start draining through, kind of like what your bathtub would do as it drains out using gravity. But as that water drains through, the only difference is inside is a fan that captures that water power as it drains through straight down, spins it, and then through a series of belts and pulleys it brings power into the mill. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's a new invention, but water turbines actually go back to the Roman Empire. This design started coming out after the Civil War, and it is a special design. It's a design that's still in use today. It's called the Lapel Turbine. And inside the turbine, the fan actually has 3 tiers of cups that are angled slightly backwards. At a certain elevation, that water actually starts to twist because of the Coriolis effect. Well, those cups are angled just right, so when that water starts to twist, it'll capture, spin that fan back the other way. So it's a very unique piece, a very important piece of technology that stemmed our industrial revolution for woolen mills, flour mills, sawmills, and the like. The story of white flour, when it came about, really progressed the world in our country in particular. When this technology came out and you made a more durable, preservable product, you were able to commercialize it. Big corporations started making flour, putting it in a sack or a barrel, shipping it around the country. And with that mass production, it dropped wheat prices in half. And it's cheaper for folks to just go and buy their flour rather than farm for it. Since they didn't have to work the fields daily anymore, they could turn their attention to other things, and that's really when our country started making leaps and bounds in technology and progress. It's because their daily bread was taken care of. With white flour, you got to sift all throughout the process. It's a complex berry to grind, so you got to grind, then sift, grind, then sift, grind, then sift to remove out all the components you don't want in there. The screens actually have different sizes. They go all the way from, say, a chicken mesh that might be 1/4 of an inch, all the way down to a silk cloth. And that was one of the problems with the mill during the war. They weren't able to get the silk, World War I. So they couldn't go all the way down to the white flour stage because they didn't have the silk. So they had to stop at the whole wheat stage. And this is all, mechanized. The miller was here to conduct business and take a tally and interact with the farmers. But other than that, quality control and a little bit of mechanic work here and there, the units do all the work.
The first 2 floors of the mill mostly contain original machinery for storing, grinding, and sifting grain. But we had to go to the basement to see the guts of the operation, where a natural power source is harnessed by a man-made invention.
This is one of the magic spots. You got the big belt. It goes outside to the turbine. On top of that turbine is a large pulley called a flywheel pulley. And that's what transfers your energy inside to this long line shaft, which ever so often has smaller pulleys that have belts that go up to your individual units. They live life like that, hard work, milling, and then the whole area changed. We had a major industry come here. West Eminence was the world's largest sawmill of its kind. Most of everything that was built from here west to California, as far as rail lines, settlements, came from these hillsides in the timber. So with that new industry, many of the local families that were growing crops and bringing it to the mill, they started logging, and they started being paid for the first time. That logging company would pay the local families in company credit, and they would simply use that company credit in the company store to buy their flour, and the mill was no longer utilized on a daily basis. Really, the only thing that kept this old mill alive in the 20s and the 30s was Prohibition. A lot of moonshining in the area, and a lot of the moonshiners would have their corn brought out and have it ground down at this mill for use in the moonshine industry.
Although the mill's original function had begun to become obsolete, its historical significance saved it from simply being absorbed back into the landscape.
In 1924, this mill and this area here at Alley was actually turned into one of the first of 7 state parks. And then the National Park Service, when they created the Ozark National Scenic Riverways in 1964, Alley was rolled into that Scenic Riverways starting in 1971. Lots of archaeology sites, and they actually did one here at the mill. And they turned up evidence that dated back 10,000 years ago to the Paleo Indians that would roam through the area chasing mastodon. So people have been here since that long, and we still have folks coming daily here to the Alley Mill